tickle, tickle.
Seats up the front here if you'd like to come down.
Well, welcome to this very important day in America. My name is John Granger, and on behalf of Carolyn, I'm honoured to be your MC today. Bob and I were contemporaries at primary and secondary school, and therefore we've been laughing, disagreeing, joking and celebrating for 70 years. Welcome to the Bristol Hill Motor Inn, a venue that has been so significant in the lives of Carolyn and Bob in the last decade or so. And in accordance with their wishes, prayers and hymns will be replaced by 1960s music and a kaleidoscope of photos which are sure to draw some ears and eyes. And perhaps, for many of us, a chance to wistfully look back at a world that seemed a little less complicated. We have three speakers. And I'd like to invite our first speaker today, Kelvin Noonan. Kelvin is from Maryborough and well known to many of you, as well as being a good friend of Bob's. Kelvin is also a very keen tennis player.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. All those friends and relations of Bob and Caroline. It's my pleasure to read you a statement. I better put my glasses on. I won't be able to see what I did, but I started with Robert Butterfield was born to Jeanette and Edward Butterfield on April 7, 1947 in Albury. The family moved to Williamstown whilst he was in primary school. Obviously that's when John met him, and he finished his education at Williamstown High. Not sure what his marks were, John might have some words on that, but he went to work for the ANZ Bank, and that's where in fact he met the love of his life, Caroline. He was a young man then, and he was an established Melbourne-based tennis player from the late 1960s, and that's where I believe he met the McNamara family, with whom he's enjoyed a lifelong association on a tennis and family platform, and that connection remains very, very strong. He played tennis, pennant tennis, with St Kilda, Royal South Yarra, Liston and Yarraville, but I'm not sure what order that was in, but he certainly played pennant tennis at a high level at each of those clubs. He did visit Maryborough on one or two occasions as a junior. Maryborough had an Australia Day weekend, a tennis tournament in its heyday, when we actually had Australian ranked players competing in singles, doubles and mixed open events. And I can recall as a young boy going to the tournament as a spectator and being overwhelmed by the number of participants and the level and standard of play. It was quite intoxicating. At the same time, it was quite difficult to understand how people could be playing tennis that well. But Bob spoke very fondly to me of his time at this event and the many other similar events that were played on grass tennis courts throughout Victoria. At the ripe old age of 26, I think it was, he accepted a scholarship from Middle Tennessee State University in Nashville. He and Caroline decided that this was it, this was their chance to get out. I think when he joined the ANZ Bank, he might have wanted to sort of role as CEO, but I think at 26 he probably accepted the fact that he was never going to be the CEO. So he accepted a scholarship from that university, and he and Caroline went off with this life adventure, because it would have been a life adventure back then in those days. Not sure whether my wife and I would have done that back then, but I know in 1973 you could smoke on planes, the voting age was lowered to 18, fuel was 10 cents a litre, postal letter cost 7 cents, the Opera House opened in 73 and the median price for a house across Australian capital cities was about $20,000, so things have changed a bit. They landed in Nashville. Now remember, they've left on New Year's Day in Australia, pretty hot. They landed in Nashville in the snow. They had no phones, no transport, and there was no one to meet and greet them at the airport. So not a great start to the trip, so probably a little bit intimidating in lots of ways. But of course they found their way to their new home at the university. Bob studied teaching, which is something I wasn't aware of, but I got a lot of this information, of course, from Caroline, and very thankful to her for these notes. But he and Caroline lived on campus. There were some Australian names there, of course. Bob Brett, Jeff Gilchrist, Clyde Smithwick, and of course in the later years the generations of Cale, who Darren and John are here today, Kratzman, Cash, and a young man from New Zealand called Chris O'Neill, who did very well in his tennis. Probably the only New Zealand tennis player that I can recall being playing at that level. But very, very good tennis player and not a bad young man. But of course that camp was Harry Hopman's camp. If you're a tennis player, you'd certainly know that name. This is where Harry based his enterprise, and Bob worked under him. Bob always referred to Harry as Mr. Hopman. I'm sure all the tennis players around here would know that, and maybe non-tennis players, but Mr. Hopman was always Mr. Hopman. And notwithstanding a number of personal financial issues that Bob seemed to be on the wrong side of Harry with, I won't go into them, but he never ever lost the respect for the man. He kept referring to him as Mr. Hopman. Every time I tried to catch him out, but he was always Mr. Hopman. I did consult another young man in Maryborough by the name of Greg Sims. He's a physiotherapist in Nolan Street. I don't know whether some of you might know him. But he recalls Bob and Caroline at the uni. Greg went there as a young tennis player as well. And Bob was his coach, and when he was selected or drafted by the uni, he recalls hitting with Paul McNamee there. That's when Paul was actually changing his backhand from one-handed to two-handed. So for those tennis players out there, that was a big thing back in those days, changing from one to two. But McNamee did it very well. He recalls Bob being a terrific coach and being brutal in the sense that you had to do as you were told. But knowing Bob, I believe that command would have been Mr. Hopman order, and it was simply delivered by the faithful head coach in Bob. Greg said there was a 10 o'clock curfew, and he breached it one night. He was hauled into the Bob's office and read the riot act by Bob. Told once more, you go home. And that's how tough it was in those days. I can imagine Bob looking down on us today saying it's a pity the 16 to 18 generation today are not provided with that rigorous and regimented schedule. We had many conversations about those things. Yeah, he did say Bob was still rigid and very firm in his instruction, but Greg, whilst he wasn't happy with those things at times, says it was the best thing that happened to him. He asked me to pass on to Caroline his apology for not being able to be here today. Thanks, John. And he recalled Mr. Hopman buying a Lincoln Continental for Bob. That's right. Yeah. Oh, with your money, yeah. Well, that doesn't surprise me from what I've heard either. But when owning such a car was the epitome of being a very important person. So that. So there, I have to change those notes to how good Mr. Hopman was. Maybe he wasn't as good as I thought he was. Anyway, so Caroline and Bob spent 12 years at Nashville. And after Mr. Hopman moved on, Bob and Caroline set up their own academy at a country club with Kim Warwick. The enterprise itself was both those enterprises were quite large, with over 40 courts, and those courts were filled every day, and they had to bus kids to other courts. So it was quite an extensive tennis academy. That's a fairly big one, I guess, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. And it was actually run like a military camp in some ways, I guess. Had to be. In around 2010 and 11, it was agreed it was time to return to Australia. Purchasing a motel was their pre-retirement option. A broker provided a number of options, and I understand them to be somewhere in Melbourne, Toowoomba, Eden and Maryborough. There might have been others that were submitted to them, but it was for our benefit, and we're very privileged that they picked Maryborough, and that's where they settled. His tennis days then were almost finished as a result of his arthritis, so he never participated in any competitive tennis, but he's always reached out to me, and we'd hit balls and discuss them to try to settle the world's problems for as much time as we're out in the tennis court. He joined Rotary once he came to Maryborough, and he enjoyed the camaraderie that club always provides. Rotary Maryborough was an instigator of the statewide program on the domestic violence issue, and Bob was very, very passionate about that project, as most of the people in that project are. He loved his role at the motel. We used to come here a few times, not every week or whatever, but there was when the motel, when they had the kitchen and the lounge here with all the tables and chairs. There was no doubt that Carolyn was the engine room of that of the business, no doubt at all from what I saw. But Bob filling a mixture of roles of customer relations and maitre d'. That's the headings I put him under. But he certainly tried very hard. So that was he loved it. His love of the Sydney Swans, and I saw the scarf and the hat out there, and I was about to grab him actually before I got here, and I thought, I better not do that. He'd probably have a crack at me, but he loved his Swans, and regardless of the temperature, that was it wasn't an unusual sight that he'd be coming back from the gym, probably seeing Barry or Johnny Kelly or one of those fellas, and he'd have his damn hat on a hot day and his scarf around his neck, and on a 30-degree day, and after coming back from the gym where he's actually worked his butt off. He did wear that scarf and cap a lot, and obviously, like a lot of Sydney Swans supporters, was around to see them finally win a flag or two. So that was fantastic. Unbeknownst to me, he also had a bit of a cursory interest in horse racing, and that's something I wasn't aware of. But Caroline told me he was part of a syndicate of friends, who included him finally into their syndicate. We're not talking big dollars here. It was just a small indulgence, but that was certainly something that occupied his time and interests a fair bit. Bob's legacy. His legacy is embodied in the young men and women he connected with in his coaching years. He loved the idea of guiding and teaching young men and young boys and girls the ideals that were cemented into him by Mr. Hopman. He was a huge fan of Mr. Hopman and the ideals that he preached. Bob's mantra was to teach his pupils, yes, of course, certainly about tennis, but also about life, and making sure that he was helping to mould each boy or girl into a well-rounded person who would adapt to anything life threw at them, and to be ready for the real world, because there was obviously quite a few casualties at that level of kids not quite making it. So once they left the academy, he didn't get any chance of talking to them. And one little note I'll mention there is he actually took Mary Pierce, who was a was number one in the world at some stage, to her first professional tournament, amongst many others. Darren's here today, and Darren Cale came into Bob's life when Darren was in his early 20s, as I understand, as a professional athlete. And to this day, he holds Bob in the highest regard, and I think that's evidenced by the fact that he and his father, John, are here today, and possibly all of us. Great, is it? Sorry. So it's not John. No, sorry. It looked like John. That's how bad my eyes are. Oh, that's not John. Yes, so Darren's admiration, connection and respect for Bob was highlighted when he took the time to visit him here in Maryborough and in Ballarat before Bob's passing. So, Darren's a very, very busy man who shares a lot of time overseas, etc., with his work. So Bob was absolutely pickled. He was very excited that Darren had taken the trouble to do that. So Bob's connection with Darren is based on the times he spent with him and the experiences Bob shared with him. And it is this grounding and humility that he installed into each of his students, and that is the legacy he leaves with us today. So, thank you.
Terrific. We've got a video now which we're going to show, and we'll play our next bit.
So listen, we can close some now, and you will see what I mean.
stories from Herman and the boys. Our next speaker is Bobby Howlett. Bobby is a long-standing friend and in his junior years a very skilled tennis player in the early 60s. Later Bobby crossed to the dark side and played football. Despite much head shaking, Robert did forgive him. Bobby Howlett.
Thanks, John. I can't start without knowing whether Rolene found her mobile.
Oh, Bobby.
And fellas, we're inspired. No bell, I wanted your bell. We put a new strides on, we get the shorts. Closer, sorry. Alrighty, I've got a little brief one, but I was absolutely ready to be able to say something. It's a surprise, but here we go. It's a little ditty of relationship, another history.
Closer still if you like.
I'm sorry, up here.
You turn the
Okay, that's better.
Just started Little Herman's Hermits again. Yeah, hello, well, I'm Bob Howlett, and I'm very happy to be here. And as I say, I was rapt to be able to have this opportunity and suck the microphone. To say a few words about my funny little relationship, and I call him Robert. It was Robert all through, introduced to him. So what much of us here today, and I've heard a lot last night, and we're looking at all the accolades and all the previews and emails that have been reproduced. We all have our own little corny way of remembering Bob, whether it was his humour, his actions on or off the court, his business relationships or whatever, but we know about his determination, thoughtfulness and generosity, and that's one of the things that comes through with Carolyn talking about the influence with the juniors that he come into contact with. Look, today, and I think of all times after today, we each have our own little way of remembering and reviving some of those memories, treasured as they are, and we'll relive those in our own little way in the future. My relationship with Robert had a great gap period, a wee bit longer than the uni gap periods that they have these days, people taking a year off to start studying. We started in the late 1950s, early 60s in Newport, Williamstown, and as a brief introduction, then reuniting here in Maryborough in 2015, so quite a big gap. You each have your own little stories to cherish of your time spent with Robert, and I look forward, I heard some of those last night and read quite a few today. Look forward to hearing more this afternoon. You probably guessed it without pressing the green buzzer. My early days had a tennis flavour. The initial meeting of us two Roberts was more of an encounter when Dunlop volleys were the right runners to wear on what we termed in those days porous courts at the time. Volleys later became the first footwear of choice for yachtsmen, roof tilers and rock fishermen when seeking stability. I mention encounter as I was one of Robert's early conquests. He was 12, I was 13. I came runner-up to him in the under-14 singles at Newport Tennis Club. While I was disappointed at the time, never chucked the racket or whatever, it was too valuable, and it might have broke as it was wooden. But in hindsight, I'll take that, knowing of all the achievements that we've seen around the floor today, of his achievements here in Australia, and of course, 38 years in the US. I say Roberts, but certainly my first introduction to grass courts was being invited to one of Mr. Hoffman's, I call them junior orientation camps, sort of sessions that he had there, and then the next step was participating in the Victorian Schoolboys comp at Coolum. Shortly thereafter, contact faded as Rob was playing in a higher grade, and in being introduced to different clubs, Yarraville being one of those, and I went the football route from school teams and later joining John and brother Paul, who's here today, at the Spotswood Football Club, not far from Williamstown. Now, been talking about Robert, now comes the time when Robert became Bob for me. In 2015, Cheryl, my partner, invited me to an ANZ Bank College reunion from their time together in the late 60s, 70s. So I was off to Maryborough to meet Sherry, Laurie, Carolyn, Bob. No surnames were mentioned. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to meet them all for the first time and I'll have a few drinks beforehand. How wrong I was. As over a beer at Carolyn and Bob's house, or 3 or 4 beers, while getting to know each other, and with me being the odd one out, being a little bit backward, listening to all their happy days and exaggerated times, this newly introduced Bob was on tennis speak. The name Hopman came out, and as did Williamstown. And on a hunch, I asked Bob, "What is your surname?" He yelled quite proudly, "Butterfield." I said, "Robert bloody Butterfield." "You bastard, you beat me in the under 14 tennis at Newport." So now I knew who he was. And we started, and of course many exaggerated stories went on from that. And amber fluid flowed, and I think with the G&T at the end there somewhere. I learned last night talking to Paul that he was so proud the next morning of making his big Yankee breakfast, and bacon and eggs were all there and everything else, and he walked pretty quickly past and he said, "Google, play 50s, 60s music for us." And he thought he was so good, but I heard he got it from John. John had one of those Google things on his bench long before. He could try and introduce me to it. So we teased each other that who had the best backhand, who had the best forehand, went on. That was a great reuniting, and I learned a little bit more about Bob and all his achievements. He started bringing out his scrapbooks, which are treasured. Not allowed to touch them, Carolyn, leave them in the box. And we helped a little bit with the move to here, and they sold the house. But you've got to all remember that it's after 55 years. I was a little bit heavy, he was a little bit heavier. I was going grey. He had a dark rug on the top. And no one knew. Now wait on, I've got to check yours. He made me laugh some years ago because, as I say, I knew the snowy hair. I don't know whether Lynette, wherever you are, but he was snowy hair, a skinny little run at 12. I probably wasn't much bigger at 13, but I thought I'd beat him, but no. Anyway, he made me laugh a couple of winters back. We had this dialogue going through, as many of you would have had through email or telephone calls. 2 winters back, he didn't ask, as John said, he didn't say, "How are you going?" He just said, what do you think? How windy is it down there? And he said, "Bloody windy up here, mate." He said, my hair flew off. And I've had a big hard workout, chasing down the street. So it was still okay to move at that stage. I suppose over that initial weekend, we found that we both loved 50s, 60s music. We ventured overseas early in life into the US, into the UK. We had heart and skin cancer surgeries. We shared some old mates, John, Paul, plenty of others from football and tennis. And we followed the ups and downs of what was South Melbourne, now the Sydney Football Club. Many more get-togethers here in Maryborough, Ballarat at last, the Mornington Peninsula and Geelong, including a great day out with Carol and Bob and their good friends Barry and Judy on the Q train, which was sort of delayed for about 6 months before we got on board. But that was a great day. But then, and only then, did I realise how frail Bob had become. When we moved house here, we were lifting heavy pots, and he couldn't bend very well. That's a back problem. But from the other visits, and then the Q train was one of those old trains you see like on the Orient Express. You had to go down the corridor on the outside, and Bob couldn't get down there freely, and I knew he was very ill. It made us all sad. But since 2015, we cemented a ongoing text and mobile link. He would ring up, or I'd ring, we'd talk about the weather from Dromana and up here in Maryborough. Tennis matches, he'd say, switch on to 5:04 on Foxtel, there's someone on at Romania. I said, how much of the footy, Bob? But yeah, he just had that big tally out there on full time, 24/7 on the tennis. Every tennis match, I think he was looking for someone who's apologised to shine. So we carried on that, and the highlight used to be when the football season started, he would ring me, and I'm sure others, pre-game, during the game, and post-game reviews of every Swans match. And with me, fellow Swan supporters, and the Brothers Granger, who with Bob form that Saturday racing syndicate, horse racing syndicate, and the bookies loved them. He would say, us by 5 goals pre-match, was normal pre-game. Some by 10 goals, even up against last year's premiers, which was Melbourne. He said, oh, we by 10 goals. So, you wait down a minute. So I nicknamed him Mr. Positive, because he had a positive go in his probably upbringing with Mr. Hopman, discipline and confidence. Then it followed, get that effing number 9 up before I bloody kill him. Became his catch cry. If we ever drew number 9, he'd always ask, who's on it? Well, we got number 9. He hated number 9 from the loss against the Footscray Bulldogs in 2016. Apparently number 9 was one of the culprits that gave, I think, Footscray 25 free kicks to the Swans 8. He didn't forget. Mr. Positive tag was reinforced as whether the Swans won or lost. For me, he would say, there's always next week. The youngsters will learn from their mistakes. There's some extra experience they've had. Coaches will sort it out, and we'll still win the premiership. Matter of fact, I got great odds with Paul, enough for all of us to get a cruise to Florida. Not if, when it comes home. We promised him. We promoted. Can't read my own writing. Well, Cheryl, you typed this. We promoted him to the role of Victorian Regional Assistant Coach for the Swans because he didn't know much about football. He always asked us, but knowing that while he kicked many, many goals in life, none were on the footy field. Bob got a big buzz, and he would get a bigger buzz looking down today, seeing you all here, but he got a big buzz out of seeing people while he was dealing with his new off-court opposition. That reminded me of my wife who passed away with cancer, that people didn't come and see her too much. And she sort of said, well, it's not catchy, because people drifted away. And I was happy to hear all your email that you got back, Carolyn, and they're all people that want to maintain their contact with you as well. So I arranged for the Swans to cheer him up even more. This is pre-Ballarat, where Carolyn had a little bed in there for a few days. So I asked the Swans just for a few words of encouragement from the players, realising it was in the off-season. And I said just a card, just a little letterhead or something would really be great, because he's been known to sing the Swans at Geelong Hospital, and I think at Ballarat, and I sang the one at Ballarat, and I think he fell asleep. It's, unfortunately, the impact of presenting Bob with the Swan surprise when Cheryl and I visited him in Ballarat Hospital was not to be, as it arrived after we returned home to Dromana the same day as Bob left all of us. That was the Monday. And I think he's up there playing veterans doubles upstairs, and we hope the tiebreaker doesn't tire him out now. It's not as long as it used to be. I missed his voice during the Oz Open, and I will do so right throughout the upcoming footy season and in the future. Whether you knew him as Robert or Bob, he will be sadly missed by all of us here and by those who are unable to be here today. I did have some success with the Swans and Cheryl. We hope you're working on your slice backhand up there, Bob, and this might be very happy to hang somewhere, Caroline, as a memory for the other sporting club that he loved. Well, thank you all very much.
There's a place called Kokomo. That's where you wanna go to get away from it all. Bodies in the sand. Drop the cocaine, take it further. Will you fall in love to the rhythm of a steel band? Down in Kokomo. Dark chemistry, mind battle to fight, a little bit of gravity. Afternoon delight, cocktails and nights, that dreamy looking right, give me a tropical contact high, way down in Kokomo. Everybody knows a little place like Kokomo. Now if you wanna go and get away from the road, go down to Kokomo. Ooh, I wanna take it to Bermuda. Come on, pretty mama, Key Largo, Montego, baby, why don't we go down to Kokomo?
Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Tyden Gookale, Bob's nephew, someone who Bob watched grow and carve out his own niche, and with whom he established a very personal relationship. Tyson.
Thank you. I'll try to make sure I keep the mic up, but I'm sure I'll get the indications from the side here. When I'm talking, I do like to pace, so this could be a problem. Yeah, I'll have to just sidestep the whole time. So maybe some music, so it looks like I'm dancing. But the journey that I had with my uncle was very different to the rest of you, because I was one of the people that was mentored by Bob, and I referred to him as Uncle B or Uncle Robert, depending on what was going on or how serious the situation was, depending on where it came from. But it all started back because I didn't know my uncle when I was a little fella. I actually met my uncle when I was like 24 years old. And, sorry? Exactly. And, you know, living in Victoria, Melbourne at that time was the world's most livable city. I was like, why would you travel? Why would you go anywhere? But I decided to go and travel. And one of the things was, I wanted, obviously didn't have much money, so going somewhere with accommodation was a big drawback at the moment. And as I was explaining to Darren earlier, I would get round the world tickets, and then I would work out where I was going, and I would always make sure I was stopping in for quite an extended period of time, which I'm very appreciative of staying with my uncle. And my first time that I met my uncle, I was shaking, like I am now. I'd met my auntie about 3 or 4 days earlier. She picked me up from the airport, but my uncle Robert was in Japan, and he'd just come back. And I remember sitting in front of the big 50-inch TV, and for an Australian, back, you know, in the mid-90s, that was amazing, right? So, you know, and the endless channels as well, not to mention. But it was about 8, 9 o'clock at night, and I was waiting intensively, right, sitting by the door. Literally, just where that window is the front door. That's where my uncle came in. The door opens, he comes in, and I'm sitting there, and he just walks on by and disappears. And I was left sitting there for like half an hour, going, what's going on? I wasn't too sure at all. And what he was doing, he was actually going to the dogs and making sure he reconnected with the dogs back from his journey. Hence why I'm wearing this top today, right? Exactly. And I learned from that actually, and that was a big learning curve for me, because I appreciated the fact that he took the time to go and do that. But then obviously came and spent time, you know, with me. And I found that amazing. And the thing is with my uncle, you know, being the mentor, sort of, you know, the junior or the younger person, he was always in my ear about, you know, listen, Tyson, have you got your finances in order? Right? Like, because it's important. You need to be setting yourself up, right? And not 2 minutes later would be like, okay, so how's the job going? Are you happy? Is everything? Are they paying you enough? Yeah. Okay. Is there growth there? And it would always be, you know, as we were saying earlier, John, it was a very direct conversation. You know, so he would ring me up and be, hello, what's happening with this? What's happening with that? And I referred to it more as the interrogation process. And a lot of times, he would have called, I would miss the call, there'd be a voicemail, and I'd say to my parking colleague, go, got to call Uncle Robert back. You know, and I'd sort of pace outside the driveway, get myself all worked up, and like, okay, you know, get into it, dial the number. Yep, okay, hi Uncle Robert, yeah. Yes, no, I'm doing good on that. And we go through that whole process, right? And but what I learned from that was that actually built a foundation and stability. And what he was doing was manufacturing a process of care and responsibility. And what I took from it and saw in him is how much he cared and how much he wanted to ensure that I succeeded. And not just me, but those around me as well. Because it wasn't just about me taking care of me, but how I was taking care of others as well. And that was massive. And then it never became an interrogation. It became a process for me to ensure that I was on track. And I was thinking about those things. So the number would come up and things would just start falling into place for me. It was a process. And it was those stringent disciplines, which we're trying to do for my sons at the moment. And it is a challenge, I'll tell you that. But that's what I see, and that's what I took from it. And it's how I saw him do that with others as well, which I thought was absolutely amazing. And you know, as important as that is, the best part about it was we always had a laugh, right? So that even at the end of it, there was always a joke, because as we all know, there was a very particular type of personality that my uncle had, and that's what I loved. Now, I do have to apologise because I was going to wear my happy pants today, and they're all fluoro colours, which I think would have complemented my uncle. So, and I do believe I actually got them from, yeah, and I've still got them. Not that I've flocked plays out for 20 years or anything like that. So yeah, and I think on that, you know, it's those three things are the major things that I've taken out from my uncle. And I don't see it like he's gone. I love my uncle, and it will always, you know, be something that is part of my life, my kids' life, my family's life, and everyone's. And you know, it's just the next step at the end of the day. Thank you.
Beautiful piece. Well, it's my turn, and I'm going to crib a little bit on Kelvin and crib a little bit on Bob. Tyson, there'll be no fluoro pants, I promise you. Thank you for coming to Mirago today to honour someone who is unquestionably a one-off. A larger-than-life personality who was admired, respected and loved throughout the tennis world and way beyond. Robert Butterfield, Bob to many and probably Barb to his North American friends. For those of us who represent the early days, it was always Robert. Obviously, I'm early days, so mostly I'm going to run with the title Robert, with a few diplomatic bobs thrown in. Where do I start? Calling him a one-off personality is so true. He even had his own way of speaking. It was clipped vowels with a drawl, sort of Margaret Thatcher meets Lou Richards. But we all knew that voice. In fact, I'm sure that if for only 3 seconds you close your eyes now, you will recall the voice. His voice and whatever that accent was. Beyond that, and excuse me for swearing, he really was a funny bugger. But that said, knowing the great man meant you had to endure Robert humour. Right up there with the worst dad jokes, hilarious to him, confusing for the rest of us. Surely there has been much head scratching for many international 12-year-old tennis proteges who worked off courts wondering, did Bob just tell a joke? However, Robert, as a 12-year-old, was a sharp-witted class clown who knew precisely where to push the diplomatic line. Teachers responding to a raised hand were sometimes forced to utter the dangerous phrase, "Yes, Butterfield, what is it?" Robert's contribution was usually followed by the whole class laughing and the teacher with eyes rolled saying, "Thank you, Butterfield, I don't think we'll pursue that." Bob's tennis life was preordained. His maternal grandmother was a fine player, as was his mother, Jeanette, and his sister, Lynette, who is with us today. The Butterfield kids became well known in local tennis circles, originally in Albury, on the border, later in Williamstown, and beyond that, at the highest level in metropolitan Melbourne. At high school, during the Butterfield years, the school tennis team was never defeated. The early years were not easy for the family. Mother and father separated, often viewed as a strategic move today. It was tougher in the 1950s and 60s. For Robert, tennis became the number one go-to, his enduring rock and his absolute joy. But there was a number two. The South Melbourne Football Club in the 1960s gained one of its greatest ever one-eyed supporters. Robert, along with some equally feral mates, made sure that the habitually losing Swans were never left unloved. Opposition supporters soon became aware of an ugly lot of teenage Swans berating their team, the umpire, and them. Robert's brilliantly honed, smart-ass comments were employed with devastating effect. And an overall 2-1 South Melbourne losing ratio never dampened the faithful feral. As to the Swans' ultimate transition to Sydney, Bob never broke stride. After all, he'd relocated to the US. And the colours were still red and white, so no big deal. The eventual AFL flags, 2005, 2012, were the promised miracles. His holy deliverance, after 72 years, good had finally triumphed over evil. Although not a great advocate for many modern advances, handheld communication was the exception. Mobile phones combined with television football turned him into a telephonic terror. As during the matches, a number of us received texts about every missed goal, every umpiring calamity that befell our red and whites. We, the long-standing feral Swans, will miss him all over again in March, when the first siren sounds and the first ball is bounced. As we said, Robert joined the ANZ Bank, not his first career choice, but an inspired decision, as it was there that he met Carolyn. The couple of years that followed, I'm sure he would have described as the party period. G'day, mate, Dylan. He had a great girlfriend, dangerous mates, and the South Yarra Arms Hotel was across the road. But it was also the time that Harry Hopman got in touch, and his offer, a finance university course, a significant coaching position, and the decision was simple. Bob and Caroline were headed stateside. Married in November 73, and married in 73 and flew to America in December 73. Over 3 decades, Robert coached and Carolyn supervised the accommodation, schooling and emotional well-being for hundreds of tennis hopefuls from Australia, the USA, Europe and Asia. There are booklets here today with testaments from those students, probably almost 100 testaments. I certainly urge you to take one of them. Robert's other great sporting pursuit was betting on horses. I say it with the straightest face that I can muster, that he really believed this was one skill that he had sharpened to a fine art over a considerable period. In a grossly disloyal way, I have to inform you that as a racehorse tipster, he was a businessman. Robert, in betting on horses, was not a match made in heaven. In fact, the notion of probability was unknown to him. 3 of us had to take it in turns weekly in the betting syndicate. Once he placed $40 on one single quadrilla. This quadrilla included 2 significant long shots. When it was pointed out to him that this was not the safest spot for our hard-won financial resources, he replied, "Imagine if it wins." There are lots of memories at the Melbourne Showground trotting venue where we 15 and 16-year-olds pitted our skills, I guess, against the hard-nosed nonsense bookies. Winning nights were rare, and above all, someone had always had to be designated the responsibility of ensuring that there was enough money for the 11 p.m. bus back to Williamstown. My mate Robert, the material is vast, and I can't possibly allocate the time to it that it so richly deserves. But I'm going to touch on a few things, and I know that it will strike a chord with many of you. His generosity knew no bounds. Robert, together with Carolyn, always made us feel special, welcome and warm. He loved the era that he grew up in, the 1950s and 1960s, and the sporting heroes of that era remain his real heroes throughout his life. He believed that everybody was sort of equal. Of course, Swan supporters a little more so. He was absolutely fearless in conversation. He just loved rolling a hand grenade into a lively discussion and lifting the temperature. You could say, geez, where did that thought come from? But as to his viewpoint, you were never confused. He loved to buy things. It was, no, Carolyn, don't buy one, buy 6, especially with plants. Or, the advertisement on TV said that it was good, Carolyn, so we need to get one. I'm sure a few can relate to that. He was a host, a provider, a carer. When he and Carolyn were running the show, your enjoyment, your comfort, and your every win were absolutely paramount. Formality and discourse. He could be all world in the way he saw things and how he expressed them. Stale phrases from the 1950s, I once told him. Oh, and as you know, you shook hands. You did not hug or cry. He was a great stirrer. With a smirk on his face, this usually was done over 1 or 5 drinks. Very often, his victims were unaware. I know, I was one of them many times. Gin and tonics. Nothing like a Butterfield G&T. Don't bruise the gin was the watchword. When the master was mixing, there was a great sense of anticipation and taste, and he never disappointed. Carolyn, for all the reasons that everyone here understands and embraces, thank you. Thank you so very much for everything. Thank you. for being you. Today, the galleries and photos of our three speakers have provided insights to a most remarkable life and a most remarkable person. Again, please look at and take the booklet of tributes, and do try closing your eyes for 3 seconds. You'll almost certainly hear his unmistakable voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that newspaper cartoonists are given a wonderful license to cut through the fat and nonsense fed to us on a daily basis. They can involve pouncing on puffed up politicians, pinpricking vastly overrated sports heroes, or exposing a government's shortcomings. Cartoonists can also depict occasions such as Anzac Day in a very moving way. In a weird sort of way, I can picture Bob as part of a brilliantly drawn cartoon. The scene goes like this. Imagine a tennis court. Match point is being played. On one side of the net are thousands of people. Tennis players from all parts of the world with their families. USA, Japan, Great Britain, Switzerland, and Australia. On the other side is Bob. The match is finished. The score is irrelevant. He takes off his signature floppy old cloth hat and strides across the net, just as he would have in the 1950s and 60s. There is that cherished courtly formality. His hand is outstretched as he walks. No hugs or tears here. Across the net, there are all those people whose lives he has guided, influenced, touched, and inspired. Hundreds of hands extend to meet him. He knows and remembers them all. At courtside, on both sides, there are all the non-tennis people. Another sea of friends. Me, many of you, and an army of grateful parents, acquaintances, and others. From the very powerful to the most humble. All touched by his incredible personality and the way that he's impacted their lives. The applause is loud and long. Well played, Bob. Well played, Robert. Well played, mate. Someone special.
Thank you everyone for attending today. I truly appreciate it. And this is something that Rob would have loved. I'm just going to add a few words to what everybody has said. Robert Butterfield, how do we cover his amazing life? Both John and I have had several different versions of what we wanted to say today. However, that would mean we would be here for days. Such was his life. I was going to cover the incredible 55-year journey that we shared, but I have chosen to speak to his special character. In his own way, Robert was the most caring person you could imagine and larger than life. He would put himself out there to ensure that an event was a success. So many wild and crazy pranks were instigated by him and his partners in crime. I remember one Christmas in Florida, people gathered from England, Japan, Australia, New Zealand and Italy. An English friend who was suffering the cold of England was of Italian heritage. Juliana, our gorgeous Italian friend, precipitated the prank for these pranksters. She called Stephen to tell him in her beautiful Italian accent that he had been traced and he had inherited a boatload of money. The hoax went on for days, stepped up to a new level each day. Poor Stephen. Over the years, many a poor receptionist would be on the receiving end of his humour when they asked, who may I say is calling? The answer might be President Bush, Roger Federer, or Rod Laver. Eventually, the receptionist would get wise. When it came to gatherings, Rob included everyone. Christmas at the Butterfields was usually 40 people, made up of friends visiting Florida, young people who couldn't get home for Christmas, and fellow pros. Always ready with a bottle of wine, towel over his arm, and being the ultimate host. Everyone received a small gift to celebrate the season. Rob was a feeder. If you were invited to dinner, you probably were the recipient of many cheese and bickies before dinner started. When it came to food, Rob was convinced I'd never prepared enough. As for his students, some were on the Never Never plan, but they were given the tools to obtain a good education, both on and off the court. A youngster going off to try his luck in the professional ranks had to have the proper attire from the pro shop. It wasn't unusual for students to live with us for 3 years while attending high school, experiencing Rob's parenting and philosophy of life. Recently, many have relayed the impact he has had on their lives. Some of these kids are now in their 60s. He was thoughtful beyond words. He loved his phone, constantly calling someone to check in on them or discuss his beloved Swans, the latest tournament, or his bet at the races. Any occasion, and he would send flowers to brighten someone's day. In recent times, Ellen would have to call me to clarify and confirm the recipient of his generosity. Every nurse and doctor who treated him was in line for flowers. If it wasn't flowers, there may have been a wine delivery. His gifts were always meaningful and something Rob was insistent on, even if I didn't agree. He would often come through the door with a beautifully wrapped package, telling me, "Linda picked this out for you." You wouldn't walk into a shop without finding something to buy. Each move we made would reveal treasures that had made their way into our cupboard or garage mysteriously. Rob regretted the years away kept us from being active in the lives of our closest family and friends at home. In closing, he has left the world a better place. He was thoughtful, kind, generous, loyal, and determined. Robert fought to the tiebreaker in the 5th set, but lost match point. His was a life well lived, however, so many dreams left undone. What an adventure, what memories. On Rob's behalf, I thank each of you for being a part of our journey. My dearest Robert, you are sadly missed by so many. Your fight is over.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Carolyn, thank you for your attendance today. I know that many of you have travelled a considerable distance to be here with us. Again, thank you, it is so appreciated. Please join us for refreshments and a bit of reminiscing. And I just remind you again for the book, to sign the book, and for the testaments from the overseas people, which are stapled together. Really recommend you have a look at those. They're terrific.
Can I just say something?
You certainly can.
Yeah, I won't keep it long. I know everybody's getting a bit restless. When Bob and Caroline first came to Maryborough, I can remember, before I start on that, Cal, your dress sense wasn't up to standard. But I know that the Salvation Army burnt down and you couldn't get something out of that. Yeah. So when Bob and Carol first came, Bob in particular, I remember saying to my wife Cheryl, who's this bloke getting around with a doormat in his head? And I knew him around town for I didn't say good day to quite a lot. And it was many years. I mean, I was an expert at picking doormats. I used to be a detective, and I never lost that sense, and that's one reason I haven't got a doormat. I don't care how much they spend on it. You couldn't fool me. And anyway, so it was a long time after they came here that I found out about Bob's sporting background, and I just thought it was just fantastic. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name's Ross Forster, and I've got the local news agency, and yes, anybody wants to know, I did get up at 2 o'clock this morning to deliver papers. When I did have the opportunity to really get to know Bob. I was blown away by his sporting background, and he and I instantly had a connection. I in a completely different sport, but it didn't matter. We just loved having a chat about different things, and that's what friendship was all about. And I remember when my wife and I won an award to go to America. Bob and Carol were the most generous, unassuming people you could ever meet. And when Cheryl and myself won this award, I said to Bob, "Oh, we're going to America but on this award. And, once the award's over, we'll go and have a look around America." And he said, "Well, you've got to go to New Orleans." I know that's not how you say it, but I can't say it the other way. So it was New Orleans. So we said to him, we're taking our daughter with us, who was, I don't know, 17, 18 or something like that. But she was a mad horse person. And he made inquiries with some friends over in America, 2 vets who were going to put us up for a night. And of course, Ebony was just over the moon about going to this bloody professional horse stud. Anyway, while we were over there, we got a message from Bob to say, "Look, they've had a death in the family, you can't go there." I said, "Oh, well, that's fine. I mean, it's all right with us. We'll still go down to New Orleans and have a look at the place and all that." And he said, "Look, I've organised accommodation for you in New Orleans. It's a horse stable." And I thought he was winding me up. We're going to be playing in amongst the straw and so forth. And anyway, that accommodation in New Orleans was the best accommodation that we had in America. And we stayed in some really posh places. And he said, "I've also got your tickets to go to a show." Over there they had these little boutique musical, I think they're restaurants, but I'm not sure. But very small audience, but with really top line artists. And we went to that, and that too was one of the highlights of our trip. So I just feel so honoured to have known Bob and Caroline, and she's still my sweetheart, and I'll always keep an eye out for her. I hope she hangs around Maryborough because it's a great spot, and thanks very much.
Okay, let's enjoy some refreshment, and thank you everyone.
Stand up. Stand up.